Today I want to talk to you about lessons that I learned on my first investment property ever. So this was a property I bought in 2007 in Toronto at Jane and Finch, which is not known as a very good area. It's known to be a bit of a rougher area. So I bought that property for $302,000. And what I did was I moved into a room in that house. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow. And over time, I turned it into a rooming house. I divided up the basement into separate rooms, ended up with 2.5 bathrooms throughout the house, had several rooms in the basement and another kitchenette in the basement. And I rented out rooms in the house. And at the time, the theoretical total rent, if everything was rented, was a little over $4,000. But I rarely ever collected anything close to that. I often collected in the low 3,000s on a property like that because of the tenant class that I was getting, the tenant pool that I was getting. I wasn't getting professionals with high income. I was finding people who were struggling to get jobs. There were people working at temp agencies and things like that. So somebody would get a job, they'd work for a while, they'd pay back some bills, they'd maybe buy themselves a new laptop or some new electronics, and then they'd lose the job and they wouldn't have any savings and they'd fall behind on rent. Now, at the time, I learned two main things with this property. One was theoretical cash flow. Just because the numbers say, okay, I rent, eight rooms for $500 each, that's $4,000. That's theoretical. The reality is your actual cash flow may be different from that because you may not actually receive those numbers. And then the other thing I learned was that I was too nice to tenants. For one, I shouldn't be self-managing, but I've also learned to stop listening to sob stories. I had one tenant who would lose his job, fall behind on the rent, then he would get a job, he would catch up a little bit on the rent he owed me, but also go buy new things that he wanted, new laptop, new phone, etc. And then he would lose his job again and fall further behind. And over time, he ended up over, I think, a 3-year period, I eventually had him leave and he owed me a year's worth of rent. And I was much too nice to him. Really, I only had one tenant the entire time that I think intentionally screwed me over for the rental income. He basically fell behind on rent, lost his job, took a very good paying job, but temporarily somewhere, took all of that money and disappeared in the middle of the night. He ended up he left owing me about $800. It's the only one who's intentionally screwed me over. Another tenant got in a car accident and couldn't work, and he was waiting on a big insurance payout. A year into waiting for that, which can take several years, I asked him, hey, you gotta go find somewhere else, and he did. And of course I knew I was never gonna see that, a little over $4,000, I was never gonna see that rent as well. So that's a combination of realizing theoretical rent is not real rent. You cannot expect the numbers on some of these properties to realize exactly what they are unless they're very, very premium properties. So I see people all the time, they look, oh, the City of Toronto vacancy rate is 2%. So in my pro forma calculations, I'm gonna put 2%. Well, that's not entirely realistic because even if you have, let's say, a property and there's 1 month of turnover every 2 years, you just need 1 month to fix up a few things, paint some walls, things like that. That alone is way more than 2% vacancy rate. And that doesn't account for bad debt because vacancy should include bad debt. Now, it can be a much lower amount when you're in a premium property where you have the pick of the litter for the best kind of tenants at high rental rates. That's great. But when you're dealing with properties that are supposed to cash flow more, that might be rooming houses or cut up old houses, things like that, that might not attract the best tenant pool, then you need to anticipate a much higher vacancy rate and bad debt rate. Because not only is there turnover and repairs to do between tenants, but you're also more likely to have tenants fall behind on rent, not be able to pay, have a long eviction process, have to deal with the landlord-tenant board and those delays. So the vacancy rate that you put in actually is significantly affected by the type of property you're buying, in the market you're buying, and the type of tenants you will be able to attract with the property you have.